All right, so the brain is highly metabolic. That means it uses a lot of energy. So if you think about what we had said, we had talked about all that sodium potassium pump and all of that kind of stuff and all these neurons and so forth. It ends up that the brain, it's only 2% of your adult weight, but it receives 15% of your blood supply. And we'd said it's so metabolic that it uses 20% of the glucose and oxygen, because remember we had said cellular respiration requires oxygen. So it uses a lot of the energy. But we had said that the problem is we have to protect the neurons, and yet the neurons are the ones that are needing all this stuff. And so we had said we had this blood-brain barrier, which consisted of what cells did we talk about? The astrocytes. The astrocytes are kind of the go-between, a little bit like the kings back in, feudal, whatever, Middle Ages. You had somebody to taste their food, and it was a pretty good job as long as nobody was trying to kill the king. But you got to taste the pheasant and roast goose before the king even got any of it. So anyway, that's what the astrocytes do. And the only risk to them is that occasionally they run into something deadly and it kills them, but they are replaced. So the blood-brain barrier is going to regulate the substances that make it into the brain. And we had said the astrocytes are there. They're going to be helping to protect the brain. And then we have like places like the choroid plexus. We have what we call tight junctions. That means that the cells are held tightly together, again, trying to keep any bad stuff out, away from the neurons. Okay, so what happens? So you might be saying, what is that ugly picture there? I almost forgot to mention this. So this ugly picture, believe it or not, that's, WWF wrestling before it was that. When I was a kid, they called it live wrestling. Not wrestling, it was wrestling. And you have to have a constant blood supply to the brain, or guess what? You become unconscious. And there was this thing, I don't know if it was real or not. That was a kind of a fake, kind of a TV production. But anyway, they called it the sleeper hold. And what they did is they cut off the blood to the carotid arteries, and supposedly it would make the person unconscious. Now, if they were really doing it, absolutely. But it might kill them also, so I don't know if they were really doing it or not. But 10 seconds without blood supply to the brain, and you go unconscious, and 4 minutes, and you have brain damage. Okay. So I figured I better mention why I have that ugly picture there. All right, so slide number 7 is the blood-brain barrier, and we had said this barrier is permeable. It allows to pass things like water and glucose and lipid-soluble stuff, oxygen, carbon dioxide, caffeine, nicotine, and anesthetic. So that's how you can be given a shot or an IV of something, and they can do an operation on you. It's only slightly permeable to sodium, chloride, potassium, and waste. And so that's, it is an obstacle to drug delivery. Now, remember your mythology? Achilles, right? Achilles' heel. I don't really remember my mythology, except that I know that they hung on to Achilles' heel while they did something to protect him, and the only place that he could be injured was the Achilles tendon, right? Well, we kind of had that here in the brain as well. There are places. What does your brain do? Your brain is monitoring physiology, right? So it's monitoring what's going on in the rest of your body. And so you have some locations in the brain where the blood-brain barrier is missing. And this is an area called the circumventricular organ, the CVOs. And these organs are located in the third and fourth ventricle. They're between, sort of in the in-between spaces there in your brain. And this is where you're going to be monitoring for blood glucose, for pH, which relates to CO2 levels, and then the level of ions that are present, something called osmolarity. And so what about this? Well, occasionally we do have diseases that are affecting the brain, and it ends up the circumventricular organ locations are where the disease organisms can access the brain. It's the invasion route for the HIV virus, among other things. Okay, so we've come to a point where we're going to start talking about the major parts of the brain. And when we look at this picture here, you can see there's the spinal cord here, and we're going to move upwards. Now, this big chunk here, this is the cerebrum. We're going to have an entire lecture that's going to talk about the cerebrum. So today, with the rest of today's lecture, we're going to start here at the bottom, and we're going to talk about all of this stuff here. So the lower, what we would refer to as the lower portions of the brain. So if we start at the bottom, we can start out by talking about the lowest part of the brain, which is the medulla oblongata. Now, when you think about living creatures, and you think about sort of so-called lower forms of life and higher forms of life, basically what we're saying is they have a poorly developed brain, or only a rudimentary kind of a brain, all the way up to humans and other apes are very, very smart as well. So as we sort of move up, all animals that have a heartbeat and like reptiles and amphibians, they're going to have these lower portions of the brain, but they don't have the very advanced parts of the brain like the cerebrum. So when we talk about the lowest portion of the brain, the medulla oblongata, what we're going to be talking about and the pons, we're going to be talking about parts of the brain that are responsible for basic survival stuff. So the medulla oblongata is continuous. It's the lowest part of the brain, and it is continuous with the spinal cord. And we have some structures on the anterior or ventral side. So it's on this, if you were looking at the medulla oblongata from this side, you would see what we call pyramids and olives. So the pyramids, so here we are. This is the medulla in here, and here in the middle we have the pyramids, and lateral to them we have the olives. Now, one of the things that I'd mentioned when we were talking about nerve impulses, we had said that we know that the right side of your brain controls the left side of your body, in general terms, and the left side of your brain controls the right side of your body. And so what we had called that is contralateral pathways. And so what we were saying is that the signal comes up and crosses over to this side, and then a signal comes up on this side and crosses over to that side. And it ends up that the pyramids here in between, this is the place where that decussation, the crossing over, is going to occur. So so when we look at the pyramids, they carry the nerve tracks from the cerebrum, and this is where the fibers decussate. That's where they cross over to the other side. Now, when we look at the brain, I'm going to go back at this picture here. We have, that's the cerebellum, and this is the cerebrum here. So the two different big portions of the brain there. Well, it ends up that the information from the cerebrum to the cerebellums is going to pass through the olives. So we'd said, what is the function of the pyramids? It's this decussation of motor impulses. And then when we talked about, well, what in the world are those olives? We said, oh, well, that's where the pathways travel from the cerebrum to the cerebellum. Those little bun-like, small brain-like things that are behind and below the cerebrum. All right, so next, we were talking about this part here. Next, we're going to go up here. So we're moving up, and that's going to be what we call the pons. I'll be right back.